Hello there, it's Wendy from Honey and Hustle, the channel where we talk all things gold diggers and sugar babies. Now, today, for the moment right now, I want you to think about your grandmother or your great grandmother or any woman you know, your mom, whoever, who married in the 1950s, moved to the suburbs, raised their 2.5 children, kept house, and never held a paying job. Now, I want you to consider something. The women exchanged domestic labor, her companionship, her social management of the household, her professional ambitions. It's too bad if she went to college or wanted to do something else, for financial support, for a house, for security, for access to a standard of living that she could have never achieved independently in the workforce. This structurally is the same transaction as gold digging. The only difference between the post-war housewife and the gold digger is that one of them got a wedding ring and a subscription to Better Homes and Gardens, and the other woman got labeled immoral, slutty, gold digger, whatever. That's the only difference between these two women. So today we're going to talk about why and what it tells us about which women we decide to celebrate and which we decide to shame. So here we are. Welcome back to Honey and Hustle, this channel. Like I said, I am writing a book about gold diggers and sugar babies in America over time, not so serious history, but in defense of them, honestly. And there's been so many fascinating stories. I've told some already. Go back and look at some of my other episodes where you can hear about Arabella Huntington, and we've got some future ones coming up with a lot of people. You can hear about the Flappers and kind of just where we started this whole journey through time in America. And today, I kind of want to land on post-World War II era, and just to help us frame this narrative that we're going down about gold diggers and women's choices in society. So during World War II, roughly 6 million women went to work, right? Guys were sent overseas to fight, and we needed munitions factories, we needed shipyards going, we needed aviation plants, we needed every industry working towards the war effort. So Rosie the Riveter wasn't just something made up, right? Women went to work. They went out there and they ran the logistic operations that helped supply our army overseas. And what's important about this moment is that they were good at it, right? Not just adequate, good. Productivity records were broken. Factories that were like, I don't know if women can do this. This is very physically demanded. Were shocked at the output that went down there. There was no doubt that women could run these operations. And they came back from their factory jobs with something they hadn't before. Direct experience of their own competence, of earning their own money, that they didn't have to ask for pin money from their husband, or I need this much for groceries this week. Instead, they were earning their own money, running their own households, and being valued for what they personally could do, not just who they were married to, right? But then the men came home. I mean, I guess it was good, right? The war was over, so that's good. But the men came home. And within 5 years, that whole culture narrative where the women were making their own money and running things themselves completely reversed. Women were encouraged, well, in many cases, legally required through policies that gave veterans preference to hiring and through social pressure to come home, give up the jobs to the men who deserve them after working so hard for our freedom. So the word encouraged does a lot of work in that sense. What it actually means is the economy had restructured to make it very difficult for women to remain in the workforce. Veterans got preferential hiring through the GI Bill. Women were let go from their factory positions first when the production shifted from wartime to peacetime goods. Professional schools and universities imposed gender quotas because, again, the preference was given to the men who came home. And so the whole narrative shift to say to women, this is what you want. You want a house, a husband, a white picket fence, a family. This equals success. That's what the narrative became for women. Now, Betty Friedan wrote this groundbreaking book, and she called it, in the 60s, she called it the feminine mystique. This was this thing that was happening that nobody had a name for. And she said it's the idea that a woman's fulfillment, highest fulfillment, was in her role as a wife and mother. That's the only way women could be defined in society terms as successful. It was a very powerful idea. It was also, she argued, a lie that helped serve everybody's interests except the woman herself, right? It certainly benefited patriarchy. So here's exactly what that post-war domestic scene bargain actually looked like economically. A woman married a man with earning potential, right? She left the workforce or never entered it. She ran the household. She did the cooking, the cleaning, the childcare, the social management, the invisible labor that made him able to show up every work unburdened by the logistics of the day, right? She managed the social calendar. She managed his professional reputation. She had dinner parties and helped his performance by being a hostess. She raised kids who would reflect well on the family, and she made the home a place that the man would want to return to, right? In exchange, she got financial security and a house, access to his income, as long as he allowed her to have it, health care, and the security that knowing as long as that marriage held, she would not be left destitute, okay? This is what I'm going to say again, structurally identical to gold digging, okay? It's the exchange of companionship, labor, social performance for financial support and security. The difference is that it was laundered through the institution of marriage and wrapped in notions of love, okay, and romance. So, like I said, in 1963, Betty Friedan wrote that book, The Feminine Mystique. It's one of the most influential books for feminism of the 20th century. And it made an argument that for its time was shocking, shattering. It was just mind-blowing for people that educated middle-class American women were miserable. They were deeply, deeply unhappy. And they were like, everybody's like, why? You got that house, you got that picket fence, you got those kids, you got that husband that takes care of you. Why are you so unhappy? You got it all. So that's what Betty Friedan said, called the feminine mystique. She was like, it was the problem that had no name. And what she did is she interviewed her fellow Smith College graduates. She had gone to Smith College. So these women were women who had gone to one of the finest universities in the US, who had every intellectual capacity to pursue their own careers, who were instead spending time in the house and wondering why they were so unhappy. So what Betty Friedan got right is that the feminine mystique was a construction. It was not natural. It was not inevitable. Not every woman wanted to be a wife and mother, right? It's a product of specific economic interests at the time. The men came back, they needed jobs, shoved the women out, let them take care of the home. That's what was happening. But here is where Betty Friedan got it wrong, or what she missed in her analysis. And this is where it connects directly to my argument about gold diggers. She wrote primarily about white, educated, middle-class women, okay? The problem that has no name was their problem specifically. The problem of women who had the education and the capacity for professional life, but were being told, ignore that. Your success is as a wife and mother, right? For working class women, women of color, women who didn't have access to Smith College or some other university, that post-war domestic bargain looked very different. Many of these women couldn't afford to leave the workforce, even if they wanted to. They were doing their own domestic labor, plus paid domestic labor for somebody else in their homes. They were navigating racial discrimination because the GI Bill, for example, and I bet you don't know this, it was administered in ways that systematically excluded Black veterans from its benefits. So they didn't even have the hope of that suburban home and a suburban expansion. So the feminine mystique, in other words, was class-specific and race-specific as a problem. The gold digger, the woman who pursued wealthy men as a survival strategy, was often responding to a much harder version of that same economic reality. She didn't have the option of marrying a professional class man or retreating to this comfortable home, right? She was working with what she actually had. The housewife has the luxury of not knowing that she's making a transaction, because we wrap it up in all this other, this is your role, this is natural, this is what you want to do. The gold digger knows exactly what she's doing, right? History respects the housewife and despises the gold digger. And I'll let you draw all your own conclusions about what that tells us. Or maybe I won't. I'll probably keep They'll probably spout it off here somewhere. In any case, the post-war domestic bargain, as you know, depended on one thing, and that is the marriage and the fact that the marriage would hold, right? That was the one sticking point to that whole successful issue. In the 1950s and into the 1960s, divorce was difficult. It was expensive, socially devastating, right? And crucially, very financially catastrophic, particularly for the women, right? Women who'd spent 15 years out of the workforce, right? Maybe she worked in factories and came home and raised the children and managed the household. She had no professional skills. She had no legal claim to the assets that she helped build over the years, because in most states, marital property law still strongly favored the husband. So if he left her or died without life insurance or simply just took off and stopped providing, she had very little recourse, right? The security that she had traded her independence for was entirely contingent upon the man sticking around and his willingness to provide it, okay? So that's the vulnerability that creates the opening for the gold digger. It doesn't create an opening. It makes a bad situation that makes the gold digger have to act in a certain way, right? So the post-war housewife and the gold digger both share this vulnerability, right? The difference is that the housewife arrived at it through a socially sanctioned role. And so when things went wrong, the culture was more likely to feel a little sorry for her. Like her husband took off on her. He had an affair. He was beating her up. They would feel sorry for her. The gold digger arrived at it at a route that the culture had condemned. And so when things went wrong, the culture was more likely to say that she deserved it, right? Oh, just like she was asking for it. She wore that short skirt. Nothing new under the sun here, guys. So back to the feminist physique. When it was published in 1963, something happened that Betty Friedan, who wrote the book, was honestly overwhelmed by. Women started writing to her, thousands of them, and letters saying, I thought I was the only one. I thought there was something wrong with me. I've been trying to name this for years and I haven't. Why am I so unhappy? And so the decade that followed after that saw the first mass exodus of women from that post-war domestic bargain. Divorce rates began to climb. Women re-entered the workforce in significant numbers. That second wave of feminism started to articulate politically and legally. They started to come together after suffrage, when they just got the right to vote, came forward in another fashion. And here's what connects that moment directly to our topic. The women who left those marriages, they were those housewives from Smith living that role. If they left that home, they were called gold diggers. Isn't that funny? Women who sued for alimony, for financial support after divorce, were accused of being mercenary. They were cashing in on their marriages. If you negotiated a property settlement because you were there, you were cleaning, you were cooking, you were taking care of the kids, you were doing your part of the bargain, and then you were leaving this unhappy marriage to go do something else, oh, what is wrong with you? You're a mercenary woman. You are a gold digger. Same transaction, same women, same financial exchange. When she was in the marriage, she's a respectable housewife. The moment she left and asked for compensation for the years she was there supporting it, gold digger. The label tracked the behavior that made powerful people uncomfortable. It always does, right? As soon as women act in a way they don't like, the names start coming out. So California, first one to introduce the no-fault divorce in 1969. By 1985, pretty much every state in the U.S. had some form of a no-fault divorce, which is the ability to end your marriage without proving fault. Before there had to be a fault. Like you had to accuse somebody, and I'll talk about this in a lot in my book with some of the gold diggers. Somebody had to say they were having an affair. Somebody had to kind of take the blame. The no-fault divorce eliminated that barrier to this whole problem. It also destigmatized the act of divorce in the same situation. So it also this changed this whole domestic bargain and the economics of it, but counterintuitively, it reduced women's economic leverage. Under fault-based divorce, a wrong spouse, usually the wife, is usually the guy out there stepping out on her, right, they usually had more negotiating power in the property settlements because people felt sorry for them. Under no fault, the split became more formulaic, and women who'd spent decades out of the workforce found that the settlement formula didn't fully account for the value that they had contributed to the home, right? Because nobody valued that. That was just her calling. That was her natural role, was to provide, to clean, to cook, to do all that. She wanted to do it, right? There's no benefit to that. That's what people were saying. So this is still obviously an unresolved issue. The economic value of domestic labor, childcare, household management, the career that you sacrifice so that your partner can advance, can stay late and be on call and do all that, it's still systematically undercounted in divorce settlements. The housewife who gave 20 years to the domestic bargain in good faith, thinking it would always last, is usually walking away with way less than what she put in, which means that that vulnerability that I have identified from the beginning of my YouTube channel is still here. It's the exit isn't really an exit. It's a historic problem, and it's also a current one. So I want to be precise about what I'm saying here and arguing for, because I think it's easy to hear this housewife is a gold digger claim and just misunderstand it or go off with it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't choose a domestic life as a housewife, right? I am saying that most of them in post-war were operating inside a cultural narrative so pervasive and so well enforced that you didn't have a choice. It was supposed to seem natural that you wanted this, okay? I think things have changed in that arena. It's okay to not get married. It's okay to not want children, right? Or is it? We still have those people out there saying it isn't. But what I'm saying is, when you strip away this whole cultural narrative, when you look at the transaction just structurally, rather than with any romance or any preconceived notions, it's the same exchange: domestic labor and companionship for financial security. And the fact that one version of that exchange is celebrated, housewife, and the other is condemned, gold digger, tells us nothing about the morality of the transaction, but everything about the politics of respectability. So, respectability politics is the idea that social approval is granted not based on the substance of your choices, but on how closely those choices conform to the dominant cultural values. That's always been the mechanism, how we've seen women in this whole world, basically, but definitely the Western world. The women who pursue financial security through marriage to a respectable man in a respectable ceremony in a respectable suburb, she is respectable. Her transaction, it's invisible. We negate that because that's normal. That's respectable. The woman who pursued financial security through a relationship that was not marriage, or that was too openly transactional, prenups, Jackie Kennedy did that. I'll talk about that in another episode. Or that involved a man that the culture deemed unsuitable, she's a gold digger. And her transaction is visible because it's transgressive, because we don't like it, and we're going to put you down for that. So the difference isn't the transaction. The difference was the way that went about and how it operated under respectability politics. So if we take this argument seriously, and that is that the housewife and the gold digger are both navigating the same economic reality through different socially available routes, then we have to ask the harder question, okay? Not, was the gold digger wrong, but was the economic reality that made both strategies necessarily wrong? And the answer to that is yes. Yes, we were morally bankrupt there, America, patriarchy, because a world in which the most rational strategy available to many women for securing economic stability is by attaching themselves to a man in whatever way that takes place is problematic, okay? The gold digger is not the problem. The gold digger is the symptom. The problem is an economy that still in 2026 pays women less, values women's labor less, and makes financial independence for a woman more difficult than for a man. That's the problem. The gold digger exists because the problem exists. And calling her shameless, shameful, or calculating or mercenary is a very efficient way of just avoiding the whole conversation that we should be having instead. We've spent hundreds of years judging the women who responded to an unfair system. And we've spent nearly no time examining the system, right? So that's why I'm here at Honey and Hustle, so that we can talk about it. So tell me what you think about the American housewives and the value of women's labor. Do you think there's a whole new thing now there, the trad housewife? And boy, we are going to get into that. Interesting. But I did want to just get that out there get you thinking about being in a traditional marriage where the woman stays home for security versus being the gold digger and coming in. I wanted you to look at that transaction and just see what you think about it. So give me a comment. Would love to hear from you. Do you think that it's structurally the same? Do you think that things have changed? Do you think that we are in a better position, that we don't need this whole discussion at all? Would love to hear about it. Tell me about it and hit me up there. And by all means, hit follow, because we're going to keep talking about this together. Thanks. Have a great day.